John, thank you very much for having us in today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Don.
And I appreciate the chance to ask you a few questions and help all your constituents understand a little bit more about what it's like to really be a concerned citizen and their own lobbyist.
Absolutely.
I've got a couple of questions I've prepared for you here that maybe we can talk about a little bit, and so we'll just go down the line here. Members of the public often feel awkward about approaching their representatives or senators. What advice do you have for them as they think about calling on or meeting with their legislator?
Well, Don, you've heard of the TV show Fear Factor. I think that for some individuals there's an inherent fear factor of dealing with their state representative or senator. Many people don't understand the job and are maybe a little intimidated by the representative who sits in office, or perhaps even may feel that they don't want to bother them with an issue that could be perceived as trivial. Nothing can be further from the truth. Those of us who are in public office really rely on members of the public to come forward and let us know what their thoughts are on a given issue, particularly if it's a piece of legislation that we're going to be dealing with in a current session.
So you're really open to this kind of thing and really appreciate it.
Absolutely. The feedback is very critical, and we actually look for public sentiment. We reach out and we check blog sites, we check newspapers in our district as a matter of course to find out what's on people's mind as far as letters to the editor go and news clips. But hearing it firsthand from constituents, nothing can beat that.
Most constituents, or many anyway, think that you are up on every piece of legislation that might be coming through the House, and I know you do your best to do that, but could you speak to just the volume of bills that actually you have to struggle with, and the diversity of the different issues that you have to come up with?
Yes, and it's hard for us to remember the specific bill numbers. There's a few key pieces of legislation that we may be able to recall that particular number on a given year, but those of us rank and file legislators see close to 5,000 different pieces of proposed legislation during a given year or a given session, and it does become confusing. It's best to center the discussions on the issue rather than the bill number. That does give us, you can refer to a bill number obviously when you're talking about the issue, but that helps us when we're in the course of looking at and hearing from the constituents what the issue is that they want us to deal with on a given subject. But it does become confusing because there's so many issues that are out there. I serve on 4 different committees in the House, the Insurance Committee, Judiciary, Transportation, and Liquor Control. Just on those committees, we're pretty much going to school on a whole laundry list of issues, particularly insurance. It can become a very complicated subject when we're dealing with different pieces of legislation. So the more specific, the better as far as feedback from constituents that we hear.
So come in, talk about the issue itself, and that helps you to be informed and understand the connections.
Absolutely,
and
and the more focused, I think, naturally is the better. When constituents come in, I encourage different professional groups and different lobbying groups to really come forward with 2 or 3 key pieces of topics they want to discuss. If it's a half dozen or a dozen different issues, it becomes so burdensome for us to try to get a handle on, well, what's your number 1 issue? What's your number 2 issue? And then try to go from there to build the consensus and compromise we need as legislators to get the job done.
John, there's a lot of different ways that people can get in touch with you. You know, we've got email, we've got letters, we've got phone calls, we've got visits down at your office in Harrisburg, we've got visits here. How do you prioritize those? How do you deal with all that coming in?
Well, you do prioritize those types of things, and quite frankly, nothing can beat a face-to-face visit. That by far is the most powerful impact that you can have on a representative, whether it be a senator or a House member, is taking the time to visit them in their local district office. And again, you'll find that even though we have busy schedules and we're on the road for numerous session days and committee commitments, if an advance notice is given and working with our staff, generally you can make an appointment with any of the legislators. We have open door policies, and we'll meet one-on-one at a scheduled time and place at a district office to have those types of meetings. Now, looking at the other forms of communication, email is perhaps the most widespread now, and who'd have thought that 10 years ago, when email was just beginning and people were not really in a practice of sending emails. But that now is probably the #1 method that people use to communicate with their representatives. I take pride in the fact that I read every single email that crosses into my computer, and we get a response back within a day or two. But be wary of the fact that some advocacy groups out there are fond now of form letters and form emails that are cut and paste, that are CC'd to every member of the legislature, all 203 members, the exact same text. That becomes somewhat burdensome to deal with, particularly when you receive them in large volumes and you know that it's driven by an advocacy group of one take or another. Those perhaps are not as powerful as an individually composed email or letter that's sat down and someone takes the time to draft it, to express their concerns. It doesn't have to be lengthy, just a paragraph or two, but that has a very powerful impact. Phone calls, yes and no. It can be difficult to reach us by telephone. Generally, that winds up as a message that's left for us, either on a voicemail or transcribed, and we'll try to get back to the person by phone. Faxes are occasionally used as well now, but I do think that the personal face-to-face communication is by far the best and most powerful that we deal with.
I know we found over the years it's really easy to all you got to do is just call, and surprisingly, for those who are the uninitiated, how open the door is of being able to come in and you know, the legislators, representatives, and senators have always been very willing to have discussion. Sometimes we end up seeing a staffer. Is that necessarily such a bad thing?
Absolutely not. The staff people, I can speak from my office. I have a chief of staff, and we have 4 full-time individuals under my chief of staff in the district. They are very knowledgeable on the issues, and if it's impossible to set up a meeting right away, or the time frame doesn't work with meeting with the representative, the staff people are very knowledgeable and can take notes and pass that information along to the representative, particularly before an important vote is taken.
Of course, we live in a real world too, John, where there's a lot of things that happen, and as you mentioned, there's give and take on both sides. What advice would you have for a constituent who comes in, expresses their side of the issue, but just aren't able to come to a good, solid agreement about the way things ought to go? What advice do you have to them so that they don't go away feeling like they'll never be heard again, and advice about how to understand the political process, and that there are no permanent enemies and no permanent friends either? So,
Don, you make a very great point there. The fact of the matter is, we can't make everyone happy. All parties concerned are not happy with every single piece of legislation that comes down from the Capitol. We do our best to try to reach compromise and consensus and do the best thing for our constituents and our people that we represent in our districts. But as you say, sometimes constituents are not happy. They're not happy with the final product that comes out in a bill. They may be disturbed about a certain amendment that was added at the last minute, or a language change that changes the scope of the bill that we're talking about. I would advise people not to be discouraged, because as you say, there are so many issues that are out there that need to be addressed, particularly in the area of psychology, that there's no sense in making an enemy and keeping and holding a grudge if you don't like the way things went on a certain vote. You may be disappointed with the representative who didn't support your cause on a particular bill. That doesn't mean that representative won't be helpful the next time you come forward. That's happened many times in my experience in Harrisburg. And we do that when we work on the other side of the aisle between Republicans and Democrats trying to gain compromises. I may disagree vehemently with a member on the other side of the aisle on a given day. The next day, I may need to enlist the help of that particular person for a bill that's important to me as well. So I guess the adage is, don't burn the bridges unnecessarily. It really doesn't make sense, and I think that those who hold grudges are somewhat short-sighted in that point of view.
And these are things often do take quite a number of months and often years to really to work through and to work out the issues.
That was a frustration of mine when I first got to Harrisburg 8 years ago. I was used to getting things done in a business fashion and getting things accomplished rather quickly. When you come to Harrisburg, you do have to slow down. The speed of the legislature has been compared at times to the speed of a glacier because it does take time. But it's designed that way. Our form of government is a deliberative process, and I think that we'd be doing a disservice to our citizens if we haphazardly rush into legislation and new laws without giving it a fair hearing, or having hearings around the state, studying the pros and cons as we go in. And unfortunately, that does take time, and you can't always make everyone happy. But I think that the two words that I try to stress, I was visiting a third grade group here in Edinburgh Elementary this afternoon, and I'll tell you the same thing that I told that group, is that the key words that we need to keep in mind are compromise and consensus. Those of us who are representatives need to hear the consensus of the people we represent, and that means feedback. That means feedback. If we don't hear anything from anybody, there's not much public sentiment to get things done, in our view, from where we sit. The compromise comes into place when we get the legislation on the table and we start working with amendments and working with different groups. Your group may have interactions with the medical society or with insurance companies, and we try our best to come up with a total package of bills at the end of the day that get something done in a positive fashion.
I've heard it say that as far as input, sometimes five messages is a landslide. You get 5 people coming in on a particular issue, or giving you a personal message on a particular issue. That's really a big deal, because sometimes people don't say anything.
That's right, and many times people will be critical of their legislator after a vote is taken. My response to that is, well, gee, it's nice for you to tell me now, but why didn't you give me your opinion before the vote? After the fact's too late, and we can't go back and change the votes that are taken. I've had some very good experiences with PPA on your advocacy days in Harrisburg, when you bring in different psychologists from my legislative district. Many times they're first-time visitors, people I haven't met before. It's great to be able to have that face-to-face contact, whether it be at the state capitol or in the local district offices. And I would encourage more people to get involved statewide, with their own representatives, and make sure that their voices are heard.
Thank you, John. I sure appreciate the time today.
Don, always a pleasure, and thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, Dr. McAleer.
Representative Evans, good to see you today. Thank you for seeing me. I appreciate it.
No problem.
I wanted to talk to you today about an issue that's before the House, House Bill 1000, which has to do with seeking authorizations for mental health care and services. I want to thank you, by the way, for being one of the sponsors on the bill. I greatly appreciate that, and I know this has been an issue that's been important to you. But I just wanted to come in and again, go over some of the issues with you. As you know, oftentimes when patients come to see us, they're required to get a pre-authorization or an authorization that allows them to come see us from their insurance company. The problem that we run into is that oftentimes, despite having an X number of sessions set aside for mental health treatment, like 20 a year or so, the insurance company might authorize a portion of that and then make us come back to them asking for more sessions and more sessions. The issue is not so much that that's a burden to us, but what we're concerned about is that a large portion of this money that's being spent for the healthcare dollar is going to management instead of actually paying for services to the clientele.
Well, Don, I've been happy to be been a co-sponsor originally on this bill, House Bill 1000, sponsored by Representative Mandarino. One of the criticisms I'm hearing from the insurance lobby is the fact that they feel that they are continuing to try to bring down the cost of health care and premiums, and they see this as a check and balance to keep their costs low. Do you think that's necessarily the case?
No, in fact, I would suggest, John, that by passing something like this, and again, we're not arguing at this stage with this bill that they shouldn't be getting pre-authorizations, just the way they do it, and we're just asking with the use of this bill is to just ask for one authorization per instance of care.
Okay.
So actually, it should, if they're doing this correctly, reduce their overhead altogether. That they don't have to continue to employ staff to rehear cases that they've already approved. And one of the traditional things about psychology that has been amazing in many studies that we've had across different states and different insurance companies is that psychological services tend to be self-limiting anywhere. Most people will come in for an average of 10 to 12 sessions anyway, whether there is authorization or not. That's just how long things usually take.
Well, that's good to hear, because I may get asked that question at the next insurance committee meeting. I think that it would be beneficial for you to possibly pay a visit later today while you're at the Capitol here to Representative DeLuca, the chairman of the committee,
Surely.
and possibly Representative McCosey, who is the Republican chairman, mention some of the things that you've discussed with me today, and see if we can't persuade them to take a vote on this to move the bill out of committee.
Wonderful.
That would be our next step. And I think that hearing from you would be an important thing for the chairman at this point in time. I'll do my best as a member of the committee to try to urge them along as well, because I think this is an important thing to get done in the interest of providing better mental health services to my constituents, and making sure that they have the necessary access that they deserve as well. So I think that would be a point for us to maybe try to get it moved out of committee, and then hopefully, if that's successful, we can get it to the House floor within the next month.
Thank you, John, and we'll see if we can get to see the representatives and perhaps have some folks from their district come in with us too.
Great. Well, Don, always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you very much for
Truly
stopping by
appreciate
today.
it.
Okay.
We'll see you.
Take care now.